There are many forms of wildlife that live in close proximity to people, but perhaps the best known and most liked is the chipmunk. With its striped coat and relatively thin tail of hair, the chipmunk is easily recognized.
The relative abundance of this rodent in the park, its preference for a life on the ground, its willingness to frequent open settings during the day, and its tendency to approach people help make the chipmunk among the most commonly seen mammals in the Adirondacks during the warmer months of the year.
While a chipmunk is often observed from the end of March through mid-November, this creature is usually most active when summer slowly transitions into autumn. It is now that many chipmunks' favorite berries and seeds ripen and fall to the ground. So, it's common to see a chipmunk scurrying around the forest floor in search of various nuts and seeds. But it's not only food that draws chipmunks away from their burrows at this time of the year. As the young of the season's second litter begin to look for their own territory, it's common to witness occasional skirmishes of this ground-dwelling member of the squirrel family.
In the Adirondacks, whether on a porch near the center of a village, on a deck just beyond the outskirts of town, or at a lean-to in the middle of nowhere, catching sight of a chipmunk is a frequent occurrence. The abundance of mature deciduous trees in the Adirondacks, both in hamlets and in wilderness forests, creates an ideal environment for the small ground squirrel. Even though the chipmunk seldom uses trees for safety or shelter, this seed eater is heavily dependent on mature, broadleaf trees, especially many of the northern hardwoods, for the bulk of its natural source of food. In the Adirondacks, the winged seeds of the different maple trees, also known as keys, provide the chipmunk with small kernels of nutrients. The season starts in June, when red maple keys mature, and goes through September, when sugar maple keys finally twirl to the forest floor. Chipmunks also like dried black cherries and the paddle-like seeds of ash, although these seeds are not as important as our maple keys. During the early autumn, when beech nuts ripen and begin to drop to the ground, the chipmunk concentrates all of its time and energy collecting these tasty three-sided nuts. The beech nuts are especially important to the chipmunk. An abundant supply of these small, dark brown, highly nutritious nuts can easily sustain a chipmunk throughout the entire winter. During years when the crop of beech nuts is poor, the chipmunk is known to climb into the upper crown of beech trees and venture onto the outermost twigs where most of the nuts typically form. In this way, the chipmunk is able to harvest any viable nuts before they drop to the ground and are eaten by deer, bears, wild turkeys, raccoons, and a host of other creatures that readily rely on them during the autumn. Similarly, the chipmunk is known to venture out on the limb of a cherry tree in order to collect these fruits, especially when other types of seeds are in short supply. In places populated by humans, the chipmunk is often able to supplement its diet with seeds that have fallen out of bird feeders. But because the chipmunk lacks the uncanny climbing skill of the red and gray squirrels, and fails to possess the same level of agility, balance, and bounding finesse when perched on a narrow branch, the chipmunk's ability to access bird feeders placed well above the ground is limited. The chipmunk's habit of gleaning seeds spilled from a feeder, rather than making repeated attacks on these structures, causes many people to adopt a more favorable view of this rodent compared to its numerous troublesome relatives. The chipmunk stores any dried edible items that could be kept for months without spoiling. It picks them up in its mouth and hauls them back to the burrow. Using a set of internal cheek pouches, The chipmunk is able to forage for a fair period of time on the forest floor and collect a sizable quantity of food before returning to its subterranean home. The burrow of a chipmunk tends to contain a dozen feet of passageways and numerous chambers, most of which serve as a warehouse for food. There is also a football-sized cavern in this underground complex in which a nest is constructed. Dead leaves, dried grass, hair, pieces of moss, and other soft, cushiony material are used to construct this resting and sleeping structure. The chipmunk often places the main entryway into a burrow near a rock, below a fallen log, or beneath an old, partially rotted stump. One or two other entrances, used primarily for escape, are about a dozen feet from the main entryway. With sharp claws and strong legs, the chipmunk is well adapted for excavating the soil and regularly modifies, enlarges, and repairs this labyrinth. As the days become shorter, the chipmunk, like so many other wildlife species, begins in earnest to prepare for the coming season, as winter is never too far away here in the Adirondacks.
I hate to think about winter coming so soon.
Yeah, before you know it, there'll be snow on the ground, and all the chipmunks will be snuggled up in their nests, deep in their burrows.
How long does it take a chipmunk to construct a burrow? They seem pretty extensive, so it must take a pretty long period of time to excavate one.
Actually, most chipmunks don't build their own burrows, but rather recondition a vacant burrow they happen to find in an unoccupied territory. The lifespan of a chipmunk is believed to be only a few years in the wild because they have so many natural enemies. So, the turnover rate's rather high for chipmunk burrows. As young chipmunks disperse from their home, they often find a suitable territory on the forest floor in which a former resident has become a meal for a fox or a hawk or a house cat. It doesn't take long for the newcomer to locate the entrance to the vacant burrow, and it then moves into an already established burrow complex, sometimes with an extra bonus of an already sizable cache of food.
Doesn't the chipmunk sleep or hibernate throughout the winter? If it's hibernating throughout this entire period, why does it need so much to eat?
The chipmunk doesn't hibernate in the true sense of the word. While it is in an unconscious state for most of this period, it does frequently awaken to eat. It's a fairly complex dormant process that we don't have time to go into right now. Maybe we should do a program on animal dormancy sometime this coming winter.
You're right.
I am.
You're right. We're out of time. Thank you for taking the time to watch us.
Please check back often, and I hope you enjoyed Nature in the Adirondacks.